I'm counting down to Pentecost by making 31 short videos about this 31-page medieval manuscript that I copied, starting at the last page and ending at the first. Day 1, page 31. A mistaken Amen? One of the principles of medieval design was horror vacui, or fear of emptiness. Because parchment was so expensive, it was bad form to waste space. Scribes commonly abbreviated words to make the text fit the space available. This manuscript frequently abbreviates the word Amen with the letter A, or AE. When they had only a little space at the end of a line, they could shrink the Amen to just an A, as they did here. Conversely, when they were ending a section and had too much space to fill, they used a period with this little squiggle as a line filler. So what happened on page 31? Did the scribe mean to write Amen, Amen? I don't think so. Other copies of the same text have only a single Amen. My guess is that the original scribe saw that they were coming to the end of a line and abbreviated the Amen to A. Then, they checked their copybook, realized that there was nothing else to save space for, and wrote out the Amen in full. Then, since they'd started a new line but had nothing more to put to finish it, they added the line filler squiggle to fill out the space. One of the pleasures of copying a medieval manuscript is getting to relive the tiny decisions made by the scribe who copied it 500 years ago. And I'm happy to say that when I reached the last page of this manuscript, I had planned things out well enough that my final Amen turned out exactly the same. Day 2, page 30. Why the red? Right away, you'll notice that this page carries 3 words in red: antiphon, versicle, and collect, although antiphon and versicle have been abbreviated to save space. Many manuscripts featured this red text, known as the rubric, a Latin word which originally referred to red ochre or red chalk that was used as red ink. To understand rubrics, you have to understand that this manuscript is a book of hours, and a book of hours is a liturgical book, so while it could be used privately, it was meant to be read or sung out loud, often in a group setting. Rubrics weren't read out loud, but rather they gave instructions to the reader on how to sing or recite the text. In this case, antiphon tells us that this section was sung using one of the complex antiphon tunes. Versicle tells us that this section was a 2-part call and response prayer, with the call and the response being separated by a period. Collect tells us that it was a spoken prayer to be read out loud straight through. Each section required something different from the reader or readers who sang and recited the text, and the rubric told them what that was. Day 3, page 29. When is a psalm not a psalm? Page 29 features the Nunc Dimittis, an excerpt from the Gospel of Luke. Since the 4th century, it has been appointed to be sung at compline or evensong services, the last prayer before bed. You'll notice, though, that in this manuscript it's labeled a psalm, even though it's not from the Book of Psalms. Properly speaking, the Nunc Dimittis falls into the category of sacred songs called canticles, not psalms. So why label it a psalm? There's 2 possible reasons. First, the word psalm is just the Greek word for song, and even in the 15th century there was only a fuzzy distinction between words like hymn, psalm, canticle, and even prayer. Second, although Nunc Dimittis isn't a psalm, in a compline service it would be sung using a psalm tone, a sort of musical formula that could be applied to any text. So, if we're biblical scholars, we know it's not a psalm. But if we're singers, we sing it exactly like a psalm, so for us, it's a psalm. And as I mentioned before, a book of hours is a liturgical text meant for praying and singing. So if labeling a canticle makes it easier to sing properly, it makes sense for the scribe to call it a psalm. Day 4, page 28, Hairline Terminal. If you look at the right margin of this page, you'll notice 4 little loop thingies at the end of the lowercase t. In calligraphy, a long, thin line is called a hairline. The original manuscript that I'm copying, MS Codex 738, a 15th century Dutch book of hours, put a hairline through the last stroke of the R and T whenever a word ended with those letters. In medieval handwriting, it was common for letters at the end of the word to be written slightly differently, either as a stylistic flourish or to help readers parse the text more easily. Medieval calligraphy was extremely diverse, so this rule wasn't universal. For example, this manuscript, MS Codex 739, is also from the Netherlands and also from the 15th century, but as you can see, the T's don't have a hairline terminal, except in these smaller sections at the beginning, which were written by a different scribe, and those T's do have a hairline terminal, but not all of the T's. Never look for consistency in a medieval manuscript. Day 5, page 27, the Holy Cross word puzzle. This entire page is taken up with the text of the hymn Veni Creator Spiritus, which was already ancient, even in the 15th century, which, remember, is when the manuscript I'm working from was copied. The hymn's lyrics first appear in the 800s, and the first tune we have is from around the year 1000. The hymn is attributed to Rabanus Maurus, an early medieval churchman who did a bit of everything. He was a bishop, he wrote an encyclopedia, he wrote various commentaries, sermons, hymns, and poetry. He even practiced a strange form of poetry called Carmina Figurata, a sort of poetic crossword puzzle, where the text of the poem contains smaller poems or sacred names inside it. Rabanus Maurus did so much, in fact, that it's difficult to tell how much he actually did, and how much people just assumed he did because he was famous. So although he definitely wrote a huge number of hymns, we can't tell for sure that Veni Creator Spiritus was one of them. Day 6, page 26. How many hours in a day? This manuscript is a book of hours, and this page begins the hour of Compline. Hours refers to the 7 canonical hours, scheduled prayer times observed by monks and nuns, when the monastics would come together to chant psalms and say prayers. These hours of prayer possibly had their origins in a verse from Psalm 119, or possibly from ancient Roman market schedules, or both. It can be confusing to talk about hours in this sense, since the 7 canonical hours coexisted with the more familiar system of dividing the day into 24 hours. Canonical hours were more like schedules than strict units of time, and, like current schedules, they could be hard to pin down. Take the first hour, matins. In the very early monasteries of the 4th and 5th centuries, monks and nuns rose several hours before dawn and began praying and singing psalms together. They called this service matins, meaning morning. 5th century cathedrals also held a service called matins, but their service started several hours later, at dawn. Meanwhile, in the monasteries, the matins prayers lasted so long that the final portion became a second hour, lauds, and it usually took place at the same time that the cathedrals were starting their matins service. So matins could take place before dawn, or at dawn, and lauds was kind of separate from matins, and kind of wasn't, depending on who you asked and when. In addition to the 7 canonical hours of the day, one of which started before dawn, there was also a nighttime hour, vigil, making a total of 9 possible 7 canonical hours. Day 7, page 25. Everyone makes mistakes. I made a mistake on this page and skipped the word half. Scribal errors were common in medieval manuscripts and even had a place in demonology. Tidivillus was said to be a devil who collected errors in a sack which he would lay before shoddy scribes on Judgment Day as evidence against them. Scribes had a number of ways of correcting errors. The simplest was to scratch off the top layer of parchment and rewrite it. Scribes are often shown holding a small knife in the left hand, ready to erase errors. Not every error could be corrected in this way. Here, I've skipped a word, and if I put it back in, the overflow would mean that I'd have to erase several subsequent lines and rewrite them if I wanted to stay inside the margins. Usually in these cases, scribes would simply insert the missing word with a caret or sometimes a funny illustration. An important thing to understand is that medieval scribes didn't copy books as single sheets, but as bound booklets called quires, made of sheets of parchment folded in half and bound together. That meant that if they made a mistake on one page, they couldn't recopy just that page, but potentially all 4 pages on that single sheet, and in addition to that, they'd have to rebind the quire. So fixing mistakes rather than redoing the page was a simple necessity. Fortunately, I'm not abiding strictly by medieval practice, so I'm copying this book on separate single cards, rather than fully bound leaves, as the medievals did. That means that when I find an error like this, I can simply recopy that page. Take that, Tidivillus.